Please switch on the mic. We formed a quorum. It is also time to start. So first of all, confirmation of our minutes. We have already sent out the draft minutes for the meeting on the 15th of May to members. We haven't received any proposed amendments. Can we confirm the minutes? Any objection? No, thanks. Confirmed. As to the information paper issued since the last meeting, we have the Electoral Affairs Commission report on the 2017 Chief Executive election. I assume you have already received a copy. Do you have any questions? No? Then that's fine. Item 3. Review of operation of polling and counting stations of District Council and Legislative Council elections. Please refer to the following papers: CB bracket 2 1853/16-17 bracket 01 from the administration, and CB bracket 2 1853/16-17 bracket 02, which is a background brief prepared by the LegCo Secretariat. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Patrick Nip, Secretary for Constitution and Mainland Affairs. Please brief us on the paper. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Now, we have got two papers for today's meeting. First of all, review of the operation of polling and counting stations of the District Council and Legislative Council elections. That's the first one. The EAC, as well as this panel, have commented on the operation of the polling counting stations of the District Council and Legislative Council elections. 4 topics are covered and they're interrelated. First of all, procurement of venues for use as polling stations, counting arrangements, polling hours, as well as the extent of use of IT. So I would like to spend more time on the procurement of venues. In recent years, the voter turnout rate has been increasing all the time, and we need to count more ballot papers. Therefore, the counting time has been longer than usual. And then for polling counting stations, the registration and electoral office always find it difficult to return the venue by 6 o'clock the following day, that is Monday, after the Sunday polling day. We have considered different options. We have come up with 3 ideas. We want to take this opportunity to get your views on the 3 options so that we can consider the matter further. First of all, perhaps we can reschedule the polling day from Sunday to Saturday. Secondly, as to the polling counting stations, maybe we should set up a separate regional counting station so that the polling station can be vacated earlier. And the third option is to designate the day following the polling day as a school holiday. There are pros and cons under each of the 3 options. The analysis is detailed in the paper. We hope we have your support. We'll be proactive in trying to resolve the problem encountered in procuring venues for use as polling stations. We don't want to have to make use of remote venues that will inconvenience the voters. In future LegCo elections and in the DC second FC election, we will consider the use of IT in the election process. I'd like to defer to Mr. Wang Ximen, the Chief Electoral Officer from the REO, to give you the details. Yes, Mr. Wang. Thank you, Chair. This is about the review of the operation of the polling and counting stations of the District Council and Legislative Council elections. I'd like to get your comments. First of all, procurement of venues for use as polling stations. We've been trying hard to identify suitable sites, and the chairman of the Electoral Affairs Commission has also personally appealed to the venue operators, but we have encountered difficulties. Some venue operators have refused to let us use their sites, and we hope that we can study study the option of getting government schools and subsidized government schools to let us use the venues, and we'll also appeal to the suitable venues. As to the counting arrangements, currently we have the polling counting arrangement. Previous experience shows that most of them could be returned to the venue operator by 6 a.m. on the day following the polling day. And that's for the DC elections. But then the voter turnout rate has risen. So if the polling hours remain the same, we believe that for the majority of the electoral election counting task, maybe we cannot return to venues by 6 a.m. on the day after polling day. This will cause inconvenience to the schools organizations, and this will affect the future negotiations with them for procuring the venues as polling stations. Would like to share with you our observations. There are 3 viable options. First of all, schedule the polling day on a Saturday. There won't be a substantial increase in manpower or other resources.
We have to consider whether the electors are acceptable to the idea, and whereas the venues are willing to cooperate with us. Second is to set up separate regional counting stations for each GC. This is to ensure that the polling venues can be returned at 6 a.m. the following day. But then there isn't much space or much venues that can be used for that purpose, and then there is an additional 3,000 staff required. And also, we need to transport the polling or the ballot boxes to the regional counting stations, and that's not something easy. And option 3, to designate the day following the polling day as school holiday, and that it means that on Monday we can finish all the procedures, and this option will eliminate the risk involved in the process of transporting the ballot boxes and ballot papers. But we anticipate that there may be opposition from the education sector, or even some from parents, especially for those schools that are not polling stations and the parents. And there has been a suggestion that we should shorten the polling hours, but there has not been any consensus forged. And the use of IT, but in electronic voting will bring the risk of election bribery. Now, considering that there are 600 polling stations, and if we have to install IT equipment at these polling stations, then after having considered this, we think that there should not be electronic voting of counting of votes. However, we will continue to assess the situation. Now, for the GC ballot paper, it is quite large in size, so we think that electronic voting of counts is not suitable for LegCo elections. But then for DC second FCs, we will actively consider conducting electronic counting of votes for DC FCs. Now, as for LegCo traditional FC elections, since the number of ballot papers is comparatively smaller, the implementation of electronic counting votes may not significantly reduce the counting time. As such, we do not recommend the implementation of electronic voting for votes in these elections for the time being. So much for my briefing. So members can now ask questions. 3 members have indicated their wish to speak and ask questions. We are supposed to end at 3:30 on this item. Since we have only 3 members, each of you will be given 5 minutes, questions and answers included. Mr. Poon Xiaoping. Thank you, Chairman. My question is straightforward, and I won't take long. 3 options are set out in the paper. Options 1, 2, and 3 have their own pros and cons, and I am inclined towards having option 3, that there should be a school holiday on the day following the polling day. What is the government's inclination now? It should be there should be option 4. Maybe the day following the polling day should be made a public holiday, and not just a school holiday. And in relation to the last LegCo elections, Because of the difficulties of securing suitable venues, there have been long queues of electors, and the counting time took a long time. So we are now using mostly schools as the polling stations. You said that you will consult us, and then you will make your decision. What would be your considerations in making a decision? Would you be seeking the public's views on these options? Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Poon, for your question. These options are listed out, and we would like to seek members' views on them. Ultimately, we try to resolve the problems at hand. Now, in relation to the polling arrangements, what matters most is that we should have suitable locations. All along, schools have been good locations in terms of their geographic location, their space, and the proper arrangements can be put in place. So we would be focusing on how we should improve on our work in relation to procuring schools as polling stations. Now, because there are so many voters turning up, and very often late in the evening, many voters have turned up. So we face some constraints in relation to the counting period. So we couldn't finish the counting work early morning, and that also affects people's willingness to lease their premises to us. Now, for now, we don't have one inclination or another, but if we want to, say, take up option 1, schedule the polling day on a Saturday. But all along, we've been having the polling day on a Sunday, and the voters have got used to it. Now, if we switch it to Saturday, will we attract a lot of opposition? And we would like to find out. Now, say if in the GC elections we set up separate regional counting stations as we listed out in the paper, we'll have to find the right location which can accommodate the counting of so many ballot papers. And also it would have to be spacious enough to allow many people to work to count the votes, and also it takes time to transport the ballot papers to these regional counting stations, and there will be maybe risk involved. Additional manpower is needed also, so we have to consider that. Now, as for school holiday, that proposal, if we have to designate extra school holidays, we will face problems. But say if well, I know that some schools can have some flexibility in their school schedule. So can we consider, using those dates? So we'll have to talk to the schools further, and we'll see how and which option can help best to address the problems at hand. And after we've consulted all the parties, we will come back to the panel to report the same. Any follow-up? So you haven't started discussing with the schools and the EDB. Now, at the work level, we are communicating with the EDB, but we haven't yet discussed with them the details of our options. Next one, Ms. Alice Mack. Chairman, on the arrangements on the polling stations, there is always room for improvement, of course, but we think that for any changes to be implemented, they should not affect the wish of the voters to vote, and they should not inconvenience the voters. Now, we need that for any voting exercise. We need a lot of volunteers. So on your first option, and that is to say to schedule the polling day on a Saturday, the FTU is against the idea, because that will inconvenience voters and electors, and also we will need to mobilize more manpower. So this option of having the polling done on a Saturday, we won't agree to it. As to setting up separate regional counting stations, we will not be against it, because there is indeed an actual need to do that. If we look at the LegCo elections last year, in terms of the counting, that took a very long time. we are just waiting not for the counting at the stations themselves. We have to wait for the ballot papers to be transported and so on. So I think the regional counting station proposal is feasible, but we need so many extra staff. So how can you get them on board? So that's a question mark. Now, option 3, designating the day following the polling day as school holiday. We think that's worth supporting because there is indeed a need for it. Because we may have borrowed schools to be used as polling stations. And why we object to having the polling day on a Saturday? Because if the polling day is going to be a Saturday, then you can only get the school premises on a Friday afternoon. And that won't be enough time for you to do the preparation. Now, I think conversely, having the following day of the polling day as a school holiday, that works much better. Now, also we can advance the end time of the polling hours. We can shorten the polling hours. We have taken reference from a number of overseas jurisdictions. Not many places are like Hong Kong, which have a polling hours straddling over 10 hours. In the U.S., 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. South Korea, presidential election, 6 to 8. Taiwan, 8 to 4. Singapore, 8 to 8. Australian Parliament, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. So it's only Hong Kong, which have 10 odd hours or so for polling. I know that you would like to try to provide as much convenience to the workers as possible, and I think we are doing very well on that. But then I think you can still have the polling hours from 7 to 6 or 7 to 8. Now, we can start early so that the workers who have to work later on, they can vote at early morning. Thank you, Mrs. Mack, for your comments. With regard to the regional counting stations, well, that was implemented or adopted into 2000 electoral election. The beauty of this, of course, is that the individual polling stations, when they have finished with the polling, they can send the ballot papers to the regional counting stations. And at the regional counting stations, everyone would gather there. And also the candidates and the team can also gather at the counting stations to observe the process. But it largely depends on whether we can identify enough locations for setting up these counting stations. If we talk about GC elections, and we have to identify regional counting stations, we have to find a venue which is equivalent, which has a size equivalent to 7 to 17 basketball courts. We have to consider that. Now, the polling station turned counting station, is a very convenient way of doing it, and also for the school holiday option, we want to try to minimize the impact on schools. Now, if that can really be done, and that is the following day be a school holiday, which means we would do the preparations on Saturday, then the polling will take place on Sunday, and then on Monday we can wrap up everything. And then if that is made a school holiday, then that means that the schools which are now not willing to help us with providing the school premises as venues, then they may be willing to do so in the future. This is something that we can further explore. Mr. Horace Chang, I have 3 points to make. One is about the procurement of venues for use as polling stations. I know that the administration has met difficulties in finding locations or venues for use as polling stations. I agree with the administration that you should talk to the UDB and other relevant bureaus and try to appeal to the venue owners. For example, the school sponsoring bodies, social service agencies, etc., to rent out their venues. They should be more civic-minded. I know that it will create inconvenience to these people or these bodies, but elections are important in Hong Kong and they have far-reaching implications for the development of Hong Kong. So if you are a public body, if you're a school, you should be more civic-minded. You should try to cooperate and let us use your venues, because this is also very important to our next generation. So I hope that the government can step up its efforts in appealing to the different bodies to have their venues used by yourself. Now, you have come up with 3 options. So first one is a polling day on Saturdays. Second option, regional counting stations for GC. And option 3, school holiday. Among the 3 options, to the members of the public and the venue owners, the option 2, regional counting stations, has the least impact. Now, in 2000 electoral elections, that counting arrangement was adopted, but then because the counting took a relatively long time, so the EAC has changed the approach in 2004, and that is there will be polling counting station. That is set out in paragraph 13. Now, you want to shorten the counting time now. I wonder whether that option can really help you resolve the problem. Please clarify, Secretary.
And then for the polling hours, it is well known that we have got long polling hours for both the candidates as well as the agents. It is indeed a hard job. After the polling, you have to wait for the counting of the ballots. So you have to stay awake for 30, 40 hours. But of course, this has been so for many years, and we have got used to it. And there are also voters who have formed the habit of going to the polling station after dinner. So we have to strike a balance. Perhaps, first of all, instead of ending by 10:30, we should cut short the polling hours by half an hour so that we won't affect the habit of voters who like to cast their vote after dinner. By ending the polling half an hour earlier, we can have earlier counting. Perhaps in this way, we can gradually resolve the question concerning polling hours without jeopardizing the habits of the voters. So I just hope the Secretary will answer my 3 questions. Secretary, thank you, Mr. Zhang, for your questions. First of all, procurement of schools as polling stations. I agree with Mr. Zhang. That is, we need to enhance our work. I believe that schools and other public organizations are more than happy to allow us use their venues as the polling stations. However, probably they have to consider other concerns as well, and they may face difficulties. Therefore, perhaps we should contact them earlier. We should also enhance our communication with them. We should talk to the school sponsoring bodies, and we should also talk to the Education Bureau. And this way, let's hope that we can ease their concerns and we can sort of resolve their problems. We'll be working hard in this direction. As to the second point, that is the regional polling, or the regional counting station. We did have this arrangement in year 2000. For us to set up regional counting stations, it means that the ballot papers from the different polling stations have to be transferred to the counting stations before counting starts. In other words, we have to factor in the time needed for transport. And last time, the experience was that it had required more time. Of course, the advantage of having a regional counting station is that the polling stations in the region can be returned to the venue operator earlier. So this is a point to be considered. Therefore, if we set up regional counting stations, we have to consider the time needed for transportation of ballot papers, and we need to have sufficient parking and loading space. As to whether the polling hours can be adjusted, we do have an open mind. We understand that when compared with other countries, our polling hours, which run from 7:30 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. is quite a long stretch of time. However, this has been in place for many years. Please keep your comments succinct. Thank you. Dr. K.K. Kwok. Thank you, Chair. There are a number of recommendations like Saturday polling or shortening the polling hours. I won't agree to that. My question for the Secretary is as follows. At the last election, something absurd happened. Some voters arrived at the polling stations, and to their surprise, it was said that they had already cast a vote. And it was found that even if you had only produced a copy of your ID card, you were still able to vote. And then the administration resorted to a very unfair arrangement, that is the need to sign the confirmation form. I want to know whether the administration will carry on with such a most unacceptable arrangement, that is the confirmation form. On the face of it, it may not be related to today's paper, but I still want to ask this question. I think the third question is irrelevant. Thank you, Dr. Kwok, for your questions. I have noted your view. Option 1, Saturday polling, and then polling hours. You have said that you don't want to agree to such changes. Your message is clear. As to what happened at the last election, you talked about using a copy of the ID card to vote. No, the true copy. We have we tried to amend the subsidiary legislation. It's been introduced into the LegCo. We are saying that in future, you have to produce the true copy of your ID card. Photocopies will not be acceptable, so we are waiting the scrutiny by the LegCo. That's the first point. Second point, you referred to issues like the confirmation form. Well, of course, the next time we hold another round of elections, we will follow up on the recommendations of the EAC. For the confirmation forms, the administration did explain why this was necessary. I'm sure when we have to work on the preparation of the new round of elections, we'll follow this up. Chairman, I want to pick up the point made by the Secretary. I hope the new term government will not continue to divide the society. I would like to give this advice to the Secretary. Please do not drive a wedge in the society. I think last time the EAC acceded to the request of the previous term government. It went against public opinion. It is unpopular. If you continue with such an unpopular decision, you are only going to divide the society further. I just want to make sure that I give you an early reminder. This is most unpopular. Mr. Ray Chen. Thank you, Chairman. If I may go to paragraph 3 of the paper. If suitable venues were not available, the electors affected should in the future be assigned to polling stations further away from the place of residence instead of venues not suitable for the purpose. That's the recommendation of the EAC. What is meant by venues not suitable for the purpose? I think we have to uphold the principle that you can vote within your same district. If you're asked to go to a faraway place to cast a vote, you will be discouraged. Is the government going to provide any means of transport? Sometimes district organizations will arrange for the transport. Of course, it will be best if it is unconditional. But even if it is unconditional, it may appear to be suspicious. And this is something we should avoid as much as possible. What about mandating the provision of venue? I don't think we have got it in our law books, but can you do something about our legislations as to make sure that there will be mandatory procurement of venues? Thank you, Mr. Chen, for your questions. There are 2 points. First of all, in paragraph 3, the EC in its report has come up with a recommendation. The EC report has talked about the experience from the elections held last time, and they were referring to the previous polling stations. A good polling station will be a polling station with sufficient space. Sometimes another polling station has been identified to replace the previous one. Is in the same location, but then it is too small, and it has given rise to many problems. I think it is against such a background that the EAC came up with this recommendation. I do agree with you. We need to strike a balance. We want the location to be convenient, but at the same time, the venue itself should be suitable. That is, it should have sufficient space to accommodate all the activities. In other words, if we have got a suitable location but the venue itself is not suitable, then perhaps we should get a polling station a bit further away. But of course, we aren't talking about a very inconvenient polling station, though it is big enough, because this would discourage the turnout rate of the voters. So it is a matter of striking a balance. I think that's the point of the EAC. What we're going to do is that we hope that we should try to get a suitable location, a convenient location, and at such a location we get a suitable venue. Schools are usually suitable venues. So we will do more so as to identify such venues so that we can make the electoral process smoother. Mr. Chen got a second question, and that's about the compulsory acquisition of the premises for the setting up of polling and counting stations. It would require legislative amendment, and you will need the approval of the LegCo. Of course, we hope that if we can get the venue by way of negotiation and communication, it will be good. What about transport arrangements to be provided by the administration? Can that be done? We will consider what has to be taken into account. You talked about smaller polling stations. I think in the past we used to have the arrangement of having 2 smaller polling stations instead of making voters take transport to go to another place to cast a vote. I think the EAC talked about the experience from the last round of elections. On the Hong Kong Island, there was this polling station, which was a bit smaller because of the question of the location. Mr. Charles Mock, I would like to talk about the use of IT in the electoral process. Well, we can have electronic polling. You talked about the difficulties encountered in the IT hardware. If we have online voting, maybe I can sort of vote on behalf of my parents if there isn't any proper identity authentication. So indeed, this could be a problem. And then overseas countries have also encountered difficulties. And then you don't have a record. And if you lose the data, it will become a huge problem. In the USA, it would not be a major issue if they lost a few thousand votes, but the problem is getting worse. In Hong Kong, the margin is smaller, so if we do lose the data, it will be a problem. And then you talk about the authentication of the identity of an elector. I think you can do more. Now, authentication, you regard it as part of the issues to be looked at under electronic voting. Well, in fact, using an electronic means will speed up the process. Today, you have got the paper form for identity authentication. You use a ruler to cross out the name in the hard copy. Perhaps the voting itself isn't electronic, but can you not sort of use an electronic means to authenticate the identity so that it can speed things up? And then we can also avoid encountering the problem like using a photocopy of the ID card to try to cast a vote. And then you talked about the functional constituency elections. In particular, the DC 2nd FC election, you say that the candidate list is shorter and so it is more amenable to electronic counting. And then for other FCs, since the number of ballot papers is small, so it may not be that cost effective, and so you have rejected to call. Well, the way I see it is the other way round. Perhaps you should try to have electronic counting on a pilot basis. I think you should start with something easier. For the easier ones, you say that the counting itself isn't that time-consuming, so you won't try it out. Does it mean that you would never put it on trial? And what about the larger GC elections? That could be difficult. But what about trying to do it at the level of district council elections? So I think you need to change your mindset. You need to have it on a pilot basis instead of rolling it out extensively, completely.
Then you can gain some experience before you roll it out across all elections in the future. So please be succinct in your reply. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Mok, for your question. First on electronic voting. Well, overseas experience tells us that there are indeed problems. And also authentication of electors' identity. Can that be done electronically? We can study into that. Third, about electronic counting of votes. For the EC subsector elections, that has all along been used in the central computer counting system. Well, if we have to do that, the ballots, the size of the ballot paper should not be too big. And we also have to be mindful about the cost benefits, and we have to do a cost benefit analysis. And for the district council second FCs, because a large number of votes is involved and the ballot paper is not too big in size. It's not like the GC ballot papers where we've got a number of lists of candidates. So in terms of cost effectiveness, actual operation, it is more feasible. So that's why we want to try to study ways on the DC 2nd FC first. So if it is at all possible and feasible, we can launch pilots in some other elections, and we can try to roll it out later on. So this is also the direction that we are heading towards. Mr. Wong, any supplement? Mr. Christopher Zhang. Thank you, Chairman. I would like to follow up on the electronic vote counting of votes. We all know the benefits. We can shorten the counting time, and also the candidates will be notified of the results early. They don't have to wait for 15 hours. According to the paper, the greatest problem with the electronic counting of votes is that the bottleneck lies in the size of the ballot paper, and that it can't. If it is too large in size, it can't be read by the OMR. So can you study together with the ITB, Innovation and Technology Bureau, to come up with a system which can cope with a larger ballot papers so that the counting time can be shortened? Chairman, the feasibility of electronic counting of votes, we would definitely study into that. We would also talk to the computer experts on the technical feasibility of implementing such schemes. We will talk to the OGCIO and other colleagues about this. We will gauge the experts' views on the latest development. So I would like to ask, Apart from the size of the ballot papers, are there any other obstacles to the implementation of electronic counting of votes? To my understanding, it basically has to do with the fact that the ballot paper should not be too big in size because it has to be read by the counting machines. Mr. Wong, if we are to switch from manual counting to electronic counting of votes, apart from the size of the ballot paper, which is a factor, and also the issue of cost effectiveness, we have to be mindful about also the fact that we need to resequence the entire counting process. And also under the election legislation now, in relation to the counting procedures, there have been a lot of paragraphs on it. And if we have to change the counting procedures, we may have to look at the election legislation and see whether it's we need to revise or amend the law. I don't think revision of the law matters here so much. I think it's really about feasibility. Mr. Christopher Zhang, anything further from you? No. Dr. Fernando Zhang, in past elections, we see that the polling stations are not conveniently located, as mentioned by some members. We talked about the polling hours. And because the polling stations are not spacious enough, so there's a queue, people have to wait outside. And for some other polling stations, in terms of barrier-free facilities, they're not up to standard. The government has said that if the people with disability notify them in advance, then rehab buses can be arranged. And also, some temporary ramps could be put up at certain polling stations. These can be done. Now, on these 2 points, when we talk about polling or voting, which is such an important activity in a society, but then we are seeing that many public facilities, including schools and community facilities, etc., they are managed, say, by NGOs and schools sponsoring bodies. Well, they have the right not to make available such facilities. But these facilities usually come with good BFA facilities, and they're spacious, and they're good for voting. So how can they be allowed to refuse to make available their premises? This is inconceivable. And because of their doing so, the voters have to queue a long time, and some of the people with disabilities are not provided with the convenience in voting. How can we accept that kind of situation? So under the law, if we don't have the right to ask people to make available their premises, then does the government plan to amend the law? And before that, pending the amendment of the law, can't you put in some measures to ensure that these bodies should make available their venues? Of course, we have to be reasonable in our requests. I'm sure that the government will talk to them in a reasonable way. How can we accept that these bodies are refusing to make available their venues? So please consider this in all seriousness. I don't think that in the 21st century we can still allow or tolerate that situation. And how can we have polling stations which don't have barrier-free BFA access facilities? Now, Dr. Zhang referred to the BFA facilities and polling stations. I fully agree with your remark. And in the upcoming elections, we would attach a lot of importance to that. We make sure that there are appropriate arrangements for the PWDs. Concerning the schools and other public facilities, I'd like to thank the member for raising this. And we will be taking the initiative to talk to the relevant bodies and organizations. And we hope to communicate with them at an early stage so that they can plan early, and we can also address the problems and make the best arrangement. Now, if all these have been done and there is still a problem, maybe we will come to the LegCo to ask for your approval to support us in having compulsory acquisition of venues. Well, I hope that we don't need to arrange, say, rehab buses for them, because that is not a good enough arrangement. And also, can we ban organizations in providing, say, coaches and vans to take the voters to the polling stations? In terms of provision of transport means, I think if it is taken up by the government, then this is good. But then if it is taken up by some other organizations, no matter what kind of organizations they are, then there will be some sort of bias involved in this. And I don't know whether it's a really provision of an advantage or provision of a benefit, and will that run against our election laws? And I think it is more appropriate to ban altogether such arrangement, and the government should provide, instead, it should be the government which should be providing the transport means or assistance. I think we are going about our arrangements based on the law and also the requirements of the EAC. Dr. Helena Wong. Chairman, I'd like to ask, the government said that for many polling stations, while they are in fact located within schools, for public sector schools and government-aided schools, you said that you hope that they can make available the venues as at the schools as venues, polling stations, and for self-funded financial institutions, DSS. Especially we're talking about a great subsidy for them now. Would you be liaising with DSS and self-financed tertiary institutions to see whether they're willing to make available their premises? And if you are going to do that, how long will it take? Very soon we'll have by-elections for the LegCo. So can you complete all the procedures before the by-elections? And also, what is the government's proposed date for holding the by-elections? Would you wait till whether there will be appeals to be lodged by all the 6 lawmakers before you will consider the dates for the by-elections? You can choose not to answer that question because that question falls outside the scope of our discussion today. Well, no, it's all related because we need polling stations for by-elections and they need time to identify the polling stations. I will allow you to ask because we have ample time, but it's really up to the Secretary as to whether he will answer your question. Dr. Wong's question is related to polling stations and concerning schools, for government schools. Going by our experience, well, government schools are willing to make available their premises, but for aided schools and direct subsidy schools, because they are run by their own school sponsoring bodies under the school-based approach, so these the premises are really. Is it really up to them as to whether they would like to make available the premises? But anyway, we will strengthen our work in that area. Now, concerning by-election arrangements, I think they may not be very relevant to the gist of the paper, but over the past weekend, I have made a response on that particular point already. And if there are appropriate occasions in the future, I will make a response again. Would you be liaising with the self-financed tertiary institutions and DSS? Would you liaise with them? Yes. Well, if they are considered suitable venues, we will liaise with them. Now, the government has proposed several options now. For option 1, schedule the polling day on a Saturday. Well, if you choose a Saturday, will the government designate that day as a public holiday as well? Secretary? We have picked Sunday because Sunday now is a public holiday. If we talk about Saturday, and then that polling day is designated a public holiday, we may have other considerations as well. So it's not easy for me to give you a straightforward answer now. And as I set out in the paper, if that option is premised on the fact that that particular Saturday is not a public holiday. And normally some people will have to work on a Saturday. So I would like to hear more from members as to what your views are on this option. You want to do it on a Saturday because you have to count the votes the next day, and it's quite difficult for you to return the venue to the schools on a Monday. So that's why schools have declined your request. So if you want to do it on a Saturday, you count the votes on a Sunday, then the school's operation will not be affected. But then some voters have to work on a Saturday. Now, if you opt for option 1, then you have to designate the polling day as a labor holiday so that people can vote on that day because they don't have to work. Will the government consider that?
All of us will need to weigh the pros and cons of different options. For option 3, designating the day following the polling day a school holiday. Well, the impact won't be that extensive. And then sometimes school authorities can also decide which day is a day off. So in this way, we can sort of be more flexible. I think that's it for this particular topic. And we move on to the 4th item. And that's about the review of the number of elected seats for the 6th term district councils. I assume you have all received a copy of paper CB bracket 2 1848/16 to 17 bracket 01 from the administration. Another paper is CB bracket 2 1853/16 to 17 bracket 3. And there's a background brief from the Secretariat. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Patrick New, the Secretary for Constitution and Mainland Affairs. Thank you, Chair. The second topic is about the review of the number of elected seats for the 6th term district councils. The 6th district council election will take place in November 2019. We have to consider the number of elected seats so that the EAC can review the demarcation of the constituencies in 2018. Therefore, first of all, we have to decide on the number of elected seats for the 6th term so that the EAC can start its process, starting with the demarcation of the boundaries of the constituencies. Basically, we have adopted the practice adopted last year. Generally speaking, a district council member will be serving 1,700 constituents. We look at the population size, and then we also look at the number of elected seats in the district council. So for this population quota, it has always been adopted. And generally speaking, a member will be serving 17,000 voters or 17,000 citizens. The exact figure will be 16,964. That will be the starting point for calculating the number of elected seats for the 6th term DCs. We have to look at the total population in 2016 as well. The Census and Statistics Department has already published the forecast population of Hong Kong in mid-2016. And we have also got the figures of the 2016 population by census that was released in end of February. The figures in some districts are such that they are greater than that forecast by the planning department. So we'll be generous, and we are going to pick the larger figure as the basis for our calculation. On the other hand, in order to allow those who are public-spirited to have more opportunities to take part in public affairs, we are going to adopt our long-standing approach. In some districts, it is expected that in 2019 there will be a decrease in population. In theory, the number of elected seats should be decreased. However, owing to what I have said, we are going to keep the number unchanged, even though it should have been increased. And then, adopting such an approach, we have applied the figures to the population size, and for the 6th term of the district council, we would be increasing a total of 21 elected seats. For 10 DCs, there will be 21 more seats, and then for 8 other districts, the number will remain unchanged. For 3 DCs, namely the Eastern, the Southern, and Wan Chai districts, they should get a decrease in the number of elected seats, but we're not going to do that. So the total number of elected seats will be 452. Therefore, we are sort of adhering to the approach that I've just outlined, and we welcome comments from members. We will take into account your views, and after the summer recess, we are going to propose the legislative amendments, hoping that the motion will be passed by the LegCo before end of this year, so that the EAC may start preparing for the elections in the first half of 2018 and come up with suggestions concerning the demarcation of the boundaries, and the public will be invited to give views. Now, the floor is now open to questions. 2 members would like to ask questions. 5 minutes for both the question and the answer. First of all, Edward Lau. Thank you, Chair. In principle, I know that there is a mechanism to come up with the number of elected seats. I do subscribe to the mechanism. It is scientific, it is objective. However, figures are cold facts, and sometimes you need to understand the actual circumstances on the ground. Within a district council, we want to look at the population size to be served, and we should also look at the integrity of the community to be served. If we apply your figures or your formula, maybe first of all you look at the population size, and then the next step will be the demarcation of the boundaries. But then the 2 steps are interrelated. Otherwise, the community cannot be kept intact. For Tung Chung, the population has grown, and most of the population increases can be found in Tung Chung North. And according to the calculations, we need 0.51 seat more. They would like to get an additional seat, but you've ruled against that. So for Tung Chung North, we're supposed to get an additional seat because of a larger population. You're not going to increase the number of seats, and there may be merger or some other adjustments. It is worried that perhaps Ping Chau has to be lumped together with another island or areas so as to form a constituency. Now, if a district council member has to serve both Ping Chau and Cheng Chau, then he will be spending all his time on traveling, and he won't have sufficient time to do his work properly. And then for Yau Chim Mong has a huge transit population. So I just wondered if your figures can actually reflect what it will be like in the year 2019. And then let's take a look of the Northern District. Now you have applied the 2016 population figures. But then in 2016, the population size was already larger than the projected figure for mid-2019. So are you assuming that there won't be population increase in the coming 2 years? Currently, the figure has been arrived at is 0.58. So I just want to tell you that for the Northern District, the population is growing and a few housing developments are under construction. For Po Shet Wu Estate across the road from Choi Yun Estate, by 2019, maybe the population intake has been completed, and it means that the population size would not be the same as what you have given here. So perhaps by then there is a population size justifying an additional member, but you will not cater for that, and you will sort of break up a community so that the community will be served by 2 different district council members. Now, other than looking at the mechanism as well as the population size, are you going to take on board the local views so that you can keep the communities intact? Thank you, Mr. Lau, for your concerns. I understand that in individual constituency areas, something similar would emerge. When we calculate the number of elected seats in the district councils, first of all, we need to know about our basis. First of all, that will be the projected population size, and then the number of people to be served by a DC member. Now, of course, districts would vary from each other. Somehow, you need to draw a line so as to come up with a benchmark. When it comes to the demarcation of the electoral boundaries, the EAC will look at the population quota, and there is room for maneuvering, and there is plus or minus 25%. The EAC, when justified, can exceed the 25% margin. And when it comes to the district council constituency area boundaries, the EAC would consider a number of points: the geography, the transportation, the community features, etc. So I believe that we will be doing our best to respond to your concerns, and we can handle the concerns. Is there room for adjustment? I cited the case of Tung Chung as well as the Northern District. I think they're supposed to get an additional seat. Are you going to accede to the request? Please be brief in your reply. Well, the mechanism as well as the findings have been included in the paper to share with you and to seek your views. Next, Dr. Helena Wong, Chair. It is said that basically we follow the population trends when we adjust the number of elected seats in the district councils. I don't have any strong views. I just want to follow up on the following. That is the demarcation of DCCA boundaries. That's important. You don't just look at the figures rigidly. You also look at the community in identities as well as preserving the local ties, etc. In the past, I've seen the fragmentation of the DCCAs, and you couldn't see any justification at all. Yes, you have to keep the community identities. At the same time, the administration must make sure that the demarcation is done on the basis of political neutrality. It should be fair and open. Of course, we have to listen to the local opinions, but sometimes the local people will invite you to demarcate the boundaries in a certain way, which will work to his interests, and it will have a negative impact on his opponents. But then the decision will be final, and there's no way to appeal against the decision. When the government chooses which opinion to follow, I think you have to maintain your political neutrality. You mustn't allow the boundary demarcation to facilitate the winning of the election by a particular group. You are the secretary. You have to make sure that all the elections are fair and just, and you mustn't allow any bias in the demarcation of boundaries. Secretary. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Wong, for your questions. As I have said, on this occasion, we are dealing with the number of elected seats in the district councils. We hope that we can amend the law before end of the year, after being approved by the LegCo. And that will be followed by the demarcation of the boundaries, and it will be the job of the EAC. The EAC will consider the statutory requirements, the community identities, local ties, the transportation, etc. And then on the basis of the population quota, there is still this buffer of 25% plus or minus. The recommendations will be the subject matter of consultation before the EAC finalizes the decisions, and then the report will be submitted to the CE. So in November 2018, the job will be completed, and it means that it will be 1 year before the election actually takes place.
Now you may come with a provisional demarcation of the boundaries, and then you will have public consultation. Now district representatives, political parties will give you views, and then you may change or may not change the boundaries, and then you will announce the boundaries. Now after the announcement is made, if anybody thinks that there is a change and the change is unreasonable, is there an appeal mechanism or avenue for them? Thank you, Dr. Wang. This is not taken up by the Bureau, but rather the EAC. They will collect all the relevant information, and then they will have to factor in all the considerations, and then they will make a decision about based on balanced, balancing out the factors, and then they will submit the recommendations to the government, which will then be handed over to the CE for his final decision. Well, what does the CMAB have a role to play in all these? Can I ask the PS to supplement, or the Deputy Secretary to supplement? As what the Secretary said, the EAC demarcates the boundaries based on the relevant legislation. People can submit their views, and the EAC, in fact, will be encouraging people to submit their views during the public consultation period. Supporting and opposing views are welcome. Now, EAC, in dealing with disputes, will it be politically neutral? The EAC will discharge its functions in accordance with the law, and the chairman of the EAC is a judge, so I believe that he will discharge his duties in accordance with the law, and he may factor in a number of factors, and it will make a decision which will be balanced, I believe. Mr. Odin Chow, I'd like to ask, now, the paper stipulates that for the islands DC, the number of seats will remain unchanged, and that there will be 10 seats. But then, in terms of the projected population increase, there will be 22,000 people. So that's what is set out in the paper. But my personal view is that it will be more. It's just a conservative estimate. And if you consider all the outlying islands, I believe that the population will be much bigger than the estimate. Now, for islands and the North District, I think this is there is an interesting phenomenon. There is an population increase, but then for the islands, you said that there is an increase of 0.51 here, but then you are not adding in one seat based on this figure. And for the North District, it's 0.58. And ultimately, you want to maintain your original number. You've decided that there will not be 2 additional seats for these 2 districts. Now, Secretary, now for this 0.51 for us and also 0.58 for the North District, well, the population increase will be much larger than that ratio. This figure is on the conservative side. Can you be more flexible? Let's say add in 1 more seat. Well, so on the whole, there would be, say, 1 to 2 additional seats. So can you not deal with this more flexibly to meet with the district's demand? People have higher expectations on the work of the district councils these days. So if we have 1 additional seat, 1 more district councillor to serve the public, the residents there, then that would be most welcome. Now, at the Islands District Council, we discussed that arrangement. You said that there is a 0.51 increase. Why don't you add 1 seat to us? You should not be deleting the seats for some other districts to provide for 1 additional seat for islands. You don't have to do that. The islands. At the islands, transport is a major issue for us because there are a number of outlying islands. So our situation is rather unique. So can you consider this unique situation? Give us 1 more seat in view of the population increase in the Islands District. So will you consider that, Mr. Chow? Thank you for your opinion. Several points here. First, in coming up with the number of seats, we have to go by that based on the population projection. An estimate is an estimate after all. The real situation may not be like this, but anyway, we need a basis for our calculation. So we have used the planning department's projection for mid-2019 and combining that with the CNS 2016 population by census projections. So of the 2 figures, we take the higher figure, and then we are more lenient in our approach. And in terms of our calculation, we know that going by the calculation is 0.51, and for the North Districts is 0.58. And in the end, we haven't changed the number of seats there, mainly because if we look at the population and divide it by the population quota, then we come up with a 16. Now, but for 3 districts, we should have reduced their seats, but we didn't do so. So, taking into account of that, despite the fact that for these 2 districts, they have this differential of 0.5 and 0.51, we still designate it as a 0. So if we have to make a change to 1 district, then another district may come up with a similar demand. Now, for the Islands District, in the last term, when we made the calculations, well, 1 seat should be taken away from them for the last term, but we didn't do so. So that's what we did. I understand the members' concern, but anyway, we will be all ears to your views. Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Thank you, Chairman. On the total number of elected seats in DCs, you make your calculation based on the population, and we are fine with that. But then, in terms of the demarcation of boundaries, you have to consider, say, the plus or minus 25% deviation and also the preservation of the community identities. So if you go by that approach, it means that there will not be major changes to the boundaries of the DCCAs, right? You should just have 447 elected seats if you just calculate that based on the population and quota. But you are not reducing the number of seats while you should do so. But then, so you come up with 452 seats. That means you don't have to make a lot of changes to the boundaries of the DCCAs. All you need to do is to increase the number of seats based on the population increase in a certain area. Secretary, the EAC will consider a host of factors in demarcating the boundaries. Well, community identity is one, and preservation of local ties, physical features, etc. are the other factors. And if there is a population increase in a certain district, then they will look at where it is and the number and what is the impact. And after taking on board the factors I mentioned, then they will decide on the boundaries. So we have to look at all these as a whole. So it's difficult for me to make generalizations here. Well, I understand that, Chairman, but the question is, for this exercise, I mean, they are running into certain problems, I believe. We have the plus 2 or minus 25% deviation. But then you will not be taking into account the actual changes in the district. And then you fix a number. And the consequence is that you are not taking into account the changes, the real changes in the district before you consider the preservation of local ties, the 25% deviation, etc. So Secretary, you are just new to your post. You may not have the time to think this through, and I don't think it's right that you maintain the number of seats in districts where there should be a deduction in the number of seats. I think you have to make adjustments, and you have to deal with the number of elected seats based on the actual situation. So anyway, you have presented us a paper, and I will not oppose it. But in the way forward, if you consider this issue, please reconsider the mechanism again. And you didn't cut the number of seats while you should have done so. So is this a reasonable approach? And I don't think the motto is the most effective one. Of course, the more district council members are, the better service they will provide. But then we still have to be mindful about the prudent use of public funds. Thank you, Mr. Wu, for your comment. In relation to the addition and deduction of the number of seats in DCs, say for certain districts the population is going down, and based on the formula, then the number of seats should be reduced. But then, if the number of seats gets too small, too few, then it will affect the operation of the district councils. In the past, there have been cases where certain areas of the seats of a certain area under a district council have been transferred to that of another district. And Well, for districts which are seeing a population growth, but we should add more seats. But then we can't add seats incessantly. Say if there are 40 seats in the Yuen Long District Council, then that is not going to work. So anyway, we'll have an open mind as to what changes could be made. So next time, Secretary, would you undertake that when you come back next time, you will present us with new plans, new mechanism? Now, for the 6th term district councils, I think we are proceeding in full steam with the preparatory work already. Now, as to what the future arrangement will be like, we will continue to talk to lawmakers to see whether better arrangements can be put in place. We will consider that. Thank you. Next one, Mr. Eddie Ju. Thank you, Chairman. I have 2 questions. The first one. For Yuen Long District, say, for example, there are 45 seats, including the ex officio seats. Now, does the government have a cap in the number of seats in mind when you talk about district council seats? It's there is going to be a Yuen Long population intake in Hon LegCo and Yuen Long South, and say 10 years down the line, they will have then more seats than those in the LegCo. So do you have do you have a plan to draw a line somewhere?
I've noted that within the district council, we have a relatively higher number of ex officio seats. Say, for example, for the deputy chair, he's with the Islands District Council. 44% of the members are ex officio members. So when compared with other district councils where we don't have ex officio seats, the difference is very significant. For ex officio membership, of course, you only find it in the district councils with rural areas. Now for the islands, we have got the Tung Chung New Town. Tung Chung is still undergoing development. Is it still appropriate to have such a composition with the islands district council? Or would you rather consider the following point? Now, over 40% of the members are ex officio members, and they have the rural background. Do you think that it will result in an imbalance? Mr. Nip, thank you, member, for your question. For the first question, as to the number of elected seats in each and every district council, I understand that in the past, there was this question. That is, perhaps there should be a cap on the total number of elected seats. But of course, there were also other opposing views. Currently, we are adopting the same formula to arrive at the number. The second point is about the rural committees. According to the district council ordinance, a rural committee chairman will become an ex officio member of the relevant district council. There are 27 rural committees, so the RC chairman are given a seat on the relevant district councils. You have to understand this background as well as the mechanism. For the time being, we do not plan to change this arrangement. Chair, if I may follow up. Now, for the first point, just assuming that you don't want to introduce a cap, thinking that it hasn't gone beyond our capacity. But still, for Yuen Long, you would like to have 45 seats, and then for Wan Chai, 13 only. Now, you may have the signature projects. When the size of the district councils differ so much, then there will be an impact. There will also be a bearing on the financial resources to be distributed. So will the administration consider the amount of money given to district councils in accordance with the number of elected seats? Mr. Chairman, as to the number of elected seats in each district council, as well as the total number of elected seats, when the population grows, of course the number will increase. We are going to increase it by 21 for the 6th term district councils. The total has not exceeded the peak number we got in the past. Of course, we'll be watching the development closely to see if there's a need for alternative arrangements. Mr. Chu also said that the number of seats in district councils will vary, and he wondered whether there would be an impact on the distribution of resources. We'll then bear this point in mind, and we will understand more from the Home Affairs Bureau. Any other questions from other members in the first round? If not, let me ask my question. Secretary, the proposal from the administration is to base or calculations on the existing population quota. But I always think that numerical representation is only one of the many ways of practicing democracy. Now, for one child, even if you keep the same number of seats, well, it is a matter of a difference of 3,000 for each district council, for the number of people served by each district council member. For the islands, it is a matter of 800 more than the norm. In other words, a difference of almost 4,000 when you compare the smallest DC with the largest DC in terms of that sort of criteria. But of course, they're still within the 25% deviation allowance. If the population trends continue, what would you suggest to do so as to make sure that Wan Chai and the, say for example, islands won't be that different? That is, are you going to deviate from the numerical representation so that you can use other factors to study the matter? Thank you, Chair. The population quota is more or less 17,000. I understand that it has been so for all the previous terms. Now, it has been said that the number of citizens served will differ from one another, and we do have the 25% buffer for the 6th term district councils. We have been applying the same population quota. As to what will happen in the future, I think honorable members did voice their suggestions, and so have you, Chair. I'm sure in future we will give it detailed consideration to see what better ways there are for us to handle this particular scenario. I'm afraid today I don't have a clear answer for your question. Well, you have said that if you won't insist on having numerical representation, a district council can't be too small, say for example having just 6 members only, to be frank with you. So you must have a minimum number of elected seats before it can operate or it can function. I may be sort of thinking widely. Are you going to have different sizes of district councils? A large size DC, medium size DC, and a small size DC, so that even for a small size of DC, you have a minimum number of district council members, so as to facilitate the proper functioning of the DC. And again, you may have more members for larger DC and even more members for the largest DC. In this way, we will be having a basic degree of representativeness. Mr. Chairman, I can appreciate your point. If the number of seats is too small, the district council will find it difficult to function because there are committees, and then each member will have to be the chair or deputy chair of a number of committees under the council. In the past, we had tried to transfer 2 DCCAs to another district council. Now, if you start to decide on the number of citizens to be served by a DC member, or if you start to change that, then DC member will then compare with each other as to the number of citizens to be served. As to the best way as a solution, I will certainly study the matter, and I will be receptive to your views. All right, are there any other questions? Mr. Paul Chair. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your observation. Let me declare interest. I'm a member of the Wan Chai District Council. Indeed, when the council is too small, it will be difficult to divide the workload. So it is like a matter of fixed costs and variable costs. So you will have a fixed number and variable number. You must have a basic number of or minimum number of district council members. For the Senate, they do have a fixed number of members to make sure that smaller states will also be represented. So I hope the administration will reconsider the case, and you won't simply apply the population quota to arrive at the figure. But basically, I don't find problems with the suggestions in the paper. Chair, thank you. I would like to thank Mr. Chair for his comment. For the 6th-term DCs, we are applying the same formula to arrive at the number of elected seats. I think members have shared with us their observations. In some districts, the population will be growing, and then the number of DC seats will increase, and the total number will also increase. And we need to be prepared for such a scenario which will crop up. So we'll try to understand more, and we will listen to you to see what is the best way forward. Any other questions for this topic? If not, then that takes us to AOB. Dr. Helena Wong, do you have something to say under AOB? Indeed. I asked a question about the electoral by-elections. You said that it was irrelevant. I accept your view. Now that we have time left, can we invite the administration to tell us the following? That is the dates of the by-elections and also the factors to be considered by the government. Currently, we know that for Kowloon West and New Territories East, as a result of what happened to Leung and Yao, I think the CFA appeal will be heard towards the end of August. So by September, there will be an outcome one way or other. Will the administration do the following? That is, after the CFA has ruled on the Leung and Yao case, the administration will adhere to the original schedule, that is, make an announcement about the by-election date. Probably you will require 3 or 4 months' time to get the preparations done. In other words, it will be next January that we hold the by-elections. Can you confirm, or are you going to have the elections conducted together with the by-elections for members who have recently been disqualified, and you have to wait for their appeals to be heard first? Dr. Helena Wong, my understanding is that the hearing towards the end of August will not be a substantive hearing. It's a matter of whether leave will be granted to the applicant to lodge an appeal. If the answer is yes, then it will go ahead. If not, then that will be the end of the matter. So probably you better ask the administration after end of August. administration. Now we know that end of August will be a important timing, unless we are told that there won't be further appeals. But that's a possibility, but it may also be granted. Do you know how much time will be needed by the court to deliver a judgment? Do you have any idea? Chairman or administration, do you have any information at all? I don't have any information at all. I just know that it is a matter of applying for leave for it's a matter of applying for leave to appeal rather than a substantive hearing. So, Secretary, you may choose to answer or not, because you have come to talk about the two items on the agenda. This is AOB. You need to have given us advance notice. I have. It's up to Mr. Nip to decide whether to answer or not. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Wong, for your questions. Well, basically, I think Dr. Wong would like to know whether the administration is clear about the arrangements concerning the by-elections. I do understand that there are different suggestions, and we are talking about two different court cases involving 6 seats. Will they be held together or separately on 2 different occasions? I think as of now, we haven't come to a decision. This is because for the Leung and Yao case, there is a vacancy in those 2 seats. But then on the 25th of August, the CFA will hear the application. That is whether leave will be granted to have an appeal. And depending on the outcome of that hearing, we will then know about we'll know whether the court proceedings have ended and how much time will be needed.
That's point number 1. Number 2 is last Friday, the court has made a verdict, and the DOJ's colleagues have to look in detail the ruling, and we have to follow the necessary procedures. Now, within 21 days of the Secretariat knowing about the vacancies, notice has to be gazetted stating that there are vacancies in the Legislative Council. We have to know whether the 4 affected people will lodge an appeal, and how the legal proceedings will be like following that. Well, at this stage, I am not very sure myself. So under the circumstance, what we will do is we would watch closely the developments, and we will look at how the legal proceedings will be like going forward before we make decision. Now, generally speaking, if there are vacancies and we have to conduct by-elections, the EAC or the REO rather will need 4 to 6 months time to prepare for the elections, and that's how it went by our experience. Now, as to exactly when the by-elections will be held, it will also depend on operational and technical factors, including manpower deployment, and whether we have enough venues to serve as polling stations. And also, every by-election means public funds have to be spent, and how public funds should be spent in a cost-effective manner. So that's another factor that will be taken on board. So we'll have to see how the developments are like before we can come to a decision on our arrangements. And right now, I can't give you a clear answer on all these. So can I seek clarification on 2 points? First, whether the government will deal with the matter as practically soon as possible, and will you be bundling how you handle Leung Yao cases together with the other 4 disqualified members. Well, you can decide on whether you want to take that question, because the questions are coming out of the blue. Well, that has to do with the by-elections. By-elections have nothing to do with the matters discussed today. Well, don't try to defend the administration. You are just a chairman. You should allow members to ask as many questions as possible, and it will be up to the government officers to decide whether to take your questions. Well, it's a matter whether you are asking your questions in a fair manner. You should give us advance notice as to what you want to ask. Well, I have said that in AOB that we should discuss the by-elections. This is not part of the agenda item. Now, what's the purpose of AOB? AOB means that members can ask questions which are of importance and which have not been considered for discussion before. So this is an item which comes with flexibility. Well, I don't agree with your interpretation of AOB. Well, please ask the government officers to make a response. Mr. Edward Lau, Chairman, I don't know what's the urgency of asking a question about by-elections. The 4 members have just been disqualified, and we're not certain whether they are going to lodge an appeal. And the Democratic Party is now looking at by-elections, and I don't think there is any urgency to this. Well, he is not imputing any motive on you, Dr. Helena Wong. Chairman, Mr. Edward Lau made speculations on my motives. Now, I said DP only. Well, who else from the DP is here in this room? Must I be referring to you? I am the only DP member here, Helena Wong. I am protesting against his remarks. Chairman, please make a ruling. Well, please switch off the mic of Dr. Helena Wong and Mr. Edward Lau. Just now, Mr. Edward Lau said DP, and he didn't say the one who raised the AOB. He didn't name Helena Wong, so he was not imputing your motive. No, he is not imputing your motive on raising this AOB item. I am the only member here at DP, and if he is imputing my motive and you are granting favoritism towards Edward Lau, you are biased towards him. He said that the DP is coveting this seat. Well, this is not my intention of raising this AOB. Well, please switch off Mr. Helena Wong's mic. You are from DP, right? But he didn't say that the one who raised the AOB item. What are you talking about now? What are you talking about now? What is your ruling? I protest against your ruling because your ruling is not a fair one. It's a point of order. I'm asking Mr. Edward Lau to retract his remarks. You said that he only mentioned DP and not Helena Wong, and you didn't say the one who raised AOB either. He just said DP. He may have heard something about DP outside of this room. He's just mentioning DP. He didn't say Helena Wong. And I protested against this member criticizing DP. Mr. Paul Chair. Well, ROP 41(5) says that A member should not impute improper motives to another member. Well, I'm afraid that this rule will not apply here in this case. This is exactly what I wanted to say. Well, there have been so many cases of members criticizing each other. Sometimes they don't name names. They just name the party. So under that circumstance, this rule will not apply. And I'm not going to further argue with her. That's my ruling. Mr. Edward Lau. Well, I'm being interrupted all the time here. Well, they have explained to you how the ROP works. Well, Chairman, I will retract my remarks. I will not argue with this type of women. Well, she used some foul language just now. So she was also insulting somebody here. I don't think we can continue with this meeting. Meeting adjourned.